What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Wrestling with Johners. This is episode 54, and this is a special episode where we have a guest that I'll be interviewing for the next 30 to 40 minutes, and that guest is going to be Jimmy Korderas, former WWF referee. We'll talk to Jimmy very, very soon, but before we do, just a few plugs for the podcast, of course, and you can hit us up on Twitter. If you want to reach out to us on Twitter, you can do. Our handle is @withjohners_pod. We're on Instagram as well, instagram.com/wrestlingwithjohners, and of course our ever popular Facebook group. Just search Wrestling with Johners. If you're listening to this podcast on Apple iTunes, please don't forget to give us a 5-star review, and of course if you enjoy listening to the podcast, please don't forget to hit like, subscribe, share, and shout about the Wrestling with Johners podcast. This is the only podcast, I believe anyway, for all of your weekly NXT, NXT UK, WWE, and your all-round wrestling needs. So please don't forget to spread the word, tell your friends and tell your family to help me to continue to grow this podcast so that we can produce quality content for you guys each and every week. So, as I alluded to earlier on, this is a special episode with Jimmy Korderas, former WWF, WWE referee. So welcome to the podcast, Jimmy. Fantastic to have you on.
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to this. Especially, I love talking to people from the UK because it sounds like proper English to me.
Well, I'm not too sure about that, but I'll do my very best. Not quite the Queen's English from me, but so over the next 30 to 40 minutes, as I explained, we're going to be talking about Jimmy's career, how he got started as a referee, his time in the WWE, so Jimmy, you started refereeing over 30 years ago. We're also going to be talking to Jimmy about Extreme Rules, and towards the end of the episode of this podcast, we're going to be putting down a bit of a preview, some quick predictions on some of the key matches that's taken place on the WWE Network this evening. So, Jimmy, thanks again for coming on board. It's been a big and a busy weekend for wrestling fans and the wrestling industry in general. Obviously, you had AEW's Fight for the Fallen last night, along with Evolve's 10th anniversary show taking place last night. You got the New Japan's G1 Climax taking place throughout the weekend. And then, of course, tonight you got WWE's Extreme Rules, which is looking a pretty stacked card, some pretty good matches to look forward to there. We'll get into detail about Extreme Rules a little bit later on, but what's caught your eye over the weekend, and have you had time to watch any of the action so far?
It's very tough for me because there's so much of it happening right now, so it's tough getting caught. Actually, believe it or not, before we started chatting, I was getting caught up on the AEW Fight for the Fallen. So I'm about halfway through that now, and you know what? Like any other wrestling product, there's stuff I like and stuff that I would prefer I didn't see. I'm being honest, but that's with every wrestling product that I watch. But that being said, it is a great time to be a wrestling fan. I mean, there's so much out there. There's so much choice. I think there's a lot out there that would that people. You know, like I said, everybody's individual taste is different. Some people like this presentation over that presentation. Well, you're going to get a little bit of everything. And what I like about this weekend was, okay, you had your AEW who are making waves. You have the Evolve show, which is another vehicle for them on the WWE Network to get a fresh set of eyes on their product. And now people can maybe tune into that and say, hey, you know what? I've never seen this product before. It's very interesting. I kind of like what I'm seeing. So, it's a great time. And for me personally, last night, this is why I have to get caught up on everything. My co-host from our show Aftermath here in Canada, the former Santino Morello, Anthony Corelli, was running his first Battle Arts Pro Wrestling show out of his Battle Arts Academy gym yesterday. So I went there to support him for the live show, so that's why have to kind of get caught up on the other stuff later. But again, it's great, man. It's a great time. If you're a wrestling fan, you should be happy. Stop the negativity.
Yeah, it really is a great time, and we'll talk more about the current products a bit later on. But you obviously grew up in Canada, Toronto, Ontario. I understand, Jimmy. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. Born and raised, and one of the blessings, if you're a wrestling fan, if you were in my age group growing up in Toronto, was we had so much wrestling on television, almost like now. Like I'll give you an example. I started falling in love with wrestling. We used to get Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling was the main I guess, promotion from the United States we would get on television up here. But, locally we'd have Maple Leaf Wrestling. And then on certain channels, we'd get Calgary Stampede Wrestling from our Barrie affiliate or something like that. And then we'd get International Wrestling from Montreal on another channel and AWA on another channel. And this is all on one weekend. So it was a smorgasbord of wrestling. And for me, it was like hockey and wrestling, but there was so much wrestling, it kind of took over.
So even back then, you were sport for choice as far as availability, but what was open to you as a wrestling fan. I mean, when did you first get introduced to professional wrestling? When did you first clap eyes on it? Was it through a relative or a friend? Were you at school at the time? So when did you first come across professional wrestling, Jimmy?
It was kind of like as a young boy. I mean, like I stumbled across it on television and kind of like, what is this? And I started watching it, and it's weird. I started gravitating towards some of the characters, and I saw these, and you got to remember, this is probably, boy, I want to say, I'm carbon dating myself now, late 60s, early 70s. I'm like, wow, some of these characters are interesting. So I started watching, and then one of the first live events I got taken to, my neighbors at the time, their father were taking them to an outdoor stadium show here in Toronto. And just to give you an idea of who the main event, it was an NWA World Championship match, and it featured Dory Funk Jr. as the champion against the original Sheik,
Wow.
Ed Farhat.
Yeah.
And we were up in the stands, and as kids, I want to say about 10-ish, maybe around there, sneaking down onto the field and getting up really close and watching it up close, and that was it for me. I was hooked.
Wow, what a great introduction to being a wrestling fan. And who were some of the other big stars around at the time then, when you were kind of growing up watching wrestling either on TV or live in person? Who were some of the other big stars that caught your attention, made you fall in love with the sport?
Well, like I said, back then, the original Sheik as a heel, and back then I disliked the heels. I was a kid, Abdullah the Butcher was around at that time. Tex McKenzie. I remember the Fabulous Kangaroo Brothers. There was a tag team called the Love Brothers, Hartford and Reginald, who were kind of like this hippie kind of gimmick because it was like, early 70s and that kind of gravitated. But then as time went on and I started watching more of the Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, all of a sudden it was like Wahoo McDaniel and the introduction of Ric Flair before he became world heavyweight champion and stuff like that, and that really hooked me right there. That was incredible. They used to be the main source of U.S. talent coming to Toronto for Maple Leaf Gardens Wrestling that used to run every 3 weeks at Maple Leaf Gardens.
Yeah, fascinating. And as a young child, did you have any desires to jump in the ring yourself and be a professional wrestler?
Not as I was young. As I was getting older and kind of, I don't want to say I kind of got the gist of what was going on. I was starting to understand that it was more I hate to use the word more of a work. As I was starting to kind of process that maybe this is more entertainment than it is actual sport. Not saying that it's not athletic. Everything is athletic. These guys are tremendous athletes, but I'm saying from a legit win and lose standpoint. When I was starting to kind of either question it or something like that, then I started questioning, hey, how you are. I feel I'm pretty athletic. Maybe I could partake in some of this stuff, but it never got to the point where I actually got in the ring and tried it. So, of course the thought crosses your mind, but then sometimes reality kicks in.
Yeah, and sometimes if like me, if you're just not athletic enough, you got to know where your cards fall, basically. But so as I mentioned, you skipping forward a little bit, you began your refereeing career in 1985. Your first match was in the Maple Leaf Gardens. Is that right, Jimmy? That you refereed your first match?
No, my very, very first match actually was in Newmarket, Ontario, which is not quite an hour north of Toronto. A live event, house show, as we called them back in the day.
Yeah.
SD Special Delivery Jones against Jose Luis Rivera in a mask, and it was like, um, just to give you a little heads up, Pat Patterson was the one who suggested that maybe I start refereeing because I was on the ring crew and doing all that stuff, and his suggestion was, well, you're here anyways, and you're just waiting for the show to end. You can tear down the ring. We might as well use, he told Jack Tunney, might as well use him. Maybe we can make him a ref. And so he told me to get a pair of black pants, black shoes, or sneakers, a blue shirt and a black bow tie, and carry it with me all around. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, one day they just said, "You got your ref stuff?" And I said, "Yes." They said, "Well, put it on your reffing." And I thought, at one point I was going to say, but nobody has kind of like talked to me to train me or anything like that. Then on the other side of my brain, I said, don't say anything before they say no. And it doesn't happen. So, I said, okay. And I went and talked to SD Jones, who was a nice guy and a friend. I said to him, I'm reffing your match tonight. He said, oh, great. I said, I've never reffed a match before. He said, don't worry. Listen to me. I will talk you through it. You'll be fine. And it was awesome. Terrified, but awesome.
I was going to ask how you must have felt at that time, because you were in your early 20s. You're obviously transitioning from being a wrestling fan to now being part of the business, quote unquote, and then refereeing, two fairly well-known stars in the day, SD Jones and Jose Luis Rivera. I think he was under a mask, wasn't he? Red Demon on the day. But that must have been quite a nervous time for you, quite intimidating at the same time. But at least the wrestler looked after you and smartened you up before the match.
Oh, absolutely. And like I said, I felt like, obviously I felt like a robot in there moving around very stiff and like that. But, I got through it. And, once you get that initial one out of the way, I'm not saying you feel comfortable, but it's almost like a relief. It's okay. I got it out of the way. Now what can I do to improve? And that was always my mindset. It was like, what can I do to get better? I want to be good at this,
So I mean, you briefly touched on it earlier on, but what type of training did you receive as a referee back then? I mean, obviously the wrestlers are there to look after you and maybe talk you through the match, and you're there to follow your instincts as well and look after the wrestler's safety. But back in 1985, what sort of training was provided, if any at all?
It was different than back now. Like obviously now they have the performance center where you can bring guys in and train them, and they can train them to their specific what they like, how they like their officials and referees to be presented on television and stuff like that. Back then it was, you spoke to the veteran referees and like I'd speak to a Timmy White or at the time who else was there? Dave Hebner.
Yeah.
Before Earl came over, and. The twin referee thing, and I would talk to those guys and I would ask them, please watch and tell me what I'm doing wrong and what I could improve on and stuff like that. So it was pretty much, it's pretty much how the wrestlers work too. Like, young wrestlers would look to the veterans for advice, and I would do the same thing and also go to the wrestlers and say, hey, when this situation arises, what would you like me to do? You know what I mean? And that sort of stuff. So a lot of asking questions.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
yeah. And like you say, it's certainly changed to modern times because they've got the PC in Florida and one in the UK as well now. But obviously, there's not only training for the wrestlers but for the officials as well. So yes, how times have changed in the last 30 odd years. But so in the first few years between 85 and 87, you obviously wrestled for Maple Leaf Wrestling, which was Jack Tunney's organization in Toronto. Is that correct?
Yeah, but at the time when I started, it was already absorbed by the WWF at the time, so they were already pretty much a WWF product at that time. It was, it was 85. I think it was all taken over by Vince, and Jack was the president.
That's right. Still, I think that the best president that the WWF have ever had. You only saw him every so often, maybe once or twice a year, but when you saw Jack Tunney on the TV, you knew that it was something important.
Yeah, because he had that presence about him. He had that authoritative. This guy looks important, and it's funny because Jack, everywhere he traveled, he always wore a blazer and a tie, and he looked the part. He looked the part always.
But But between 85 and 87, then, I mean, obviously the first 2 or 3 years of your refereeing career, what were some of the most important lessons that you learned in them early years, as far as what to do, what do what not to do? What were some of the kind of more important lessons during them early years as a referee, Jimmy?
The most important one I thought was not to be a distraction, to take away from what the talent is trying to the story that the talent is trying. You're there to help the talent tell their story, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And you're the supporting actor in, so to speak, in a presentation. And try to stay as invisible as possible until you need to be visible, if that makes sense.
It certainly does. It certainly does, and some good advice as well. So then you officially transitioned over to the WWF in 1987. How did that opportunity came about? Obviously, you mentioned that Maple Leaf Wrestling was taken over by Vince back in '85 or thereabouts. Was that kind of just a natural progression to, right, you're officially working for WWF now, or was there an exchange of contracts? How did it all come about? How did it all change from Maple Leaf to WWF in 1987?
It was for me. There was no difference. Basically, it was just like, okay, we roll right along, keep going, and that was pretty much it. It was like, yeah, this is it.
Yeah.
So it's I hate to sound boring about it, but it was that simple.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when you think about these things, sometimes it seems like it's kind of a big contract sign-in, but you're a referee in the wrestling business. One company gets taken over by another, right? It's just another day at work, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. The bus just keeps on rolling.
There we go. So did you join before or after WrestleMania III, Jimmy?
It was before. I didn't referee at WrestleMania 3 mainly because I agree. I don't think I was ready for that largest stage yet. I was still very green, as we say.
Yeah. Okay. So when you think of that time around the late 80s, you always think of characters like Andre the Giant, Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, Jake Roberts, which are four of my favorites kind of growing up anyway. What was it like to be around them larger than life characters? From a fan's perspective, I can only imagine that it was a crazy experience back then. But for you being in that bubble, being in that environment with all them larger than life characters, what memories stand out for you more than 30 years later of some of those characters and some of the names that I didn't mention that kind of really jump out to you from 30 years ago?
The biggest thing is, I mean, a lot of times we have these misconceptions about superstars that they are a certain way, and there may be little truths to some of them, but for the most part, like it really was, as much as it was a competition amongst them to be the top guy, so to speak, there was still that camaraderie, and they still worked together. And I was fortunate enough to be in a spot where, I wasn't a challenge to them, if you know what I mean. Like, I wasn't, I wasn't a threat to their spot, so to speak. So I don't want to say I knew my place, but I did. But allowed me to actually become good friends with most of those guys, and it was actually awe. It was, I was always in awe, but at the same time tried not to show it too much because these are people you work with every day, and I was blessed enough that people like Andre took me under his wing and treated me so well, and Randy Savage and even Hogan was really cool. You know what I mean? So. And then I think back about it now that you brought it up, and I go, how freaking cool is that I get to, able to call these guys friends. And I'm like, now I'm thinking about it, I'm going, oh, wow, this is awesome. Like, how many people do that?
Yeah, but not many people will ever be able to say that they've had an opportunity to do that in their lifetime. So, must have been pretty special looking back at it. Now, I mean, we hear lots of stories about Tim White and being the kind of the carer, for want of a better word, or the driver for Andre the Giant. I mean, who did you kind of hang with back in the day, and who did you drive with, and who were you kind of close with, back in the late 80s?
No, for me, it was like it was more like the crew guys. So people like the late Joey Morella, who's no longer with us, unfortunately. Yeah. But guys like Tony Chimmel, uh, and Mike Chioda and the crew guys, and then later on when the fellows from WCW like Charles Robinson and stuff like that, and eventually our athletic trainer Larry Heck. We kind of became, especially later on when we had the brand split and SmackDown and Raw became specific brands. I was on SmackDown and we became kind of like the three amigos driving, myself, Tony Chimmel, and Larry, the trainer. So we were kind of like pretty much a set crew every week driving around together. So
yeah. So when I first became a wrestling fan, it was probably in the early 90s. I specifically remember in 91, Jake Roberts and his King Cobra latching onto the arm of Randy Savage, which led to their big feud and obviously brought Randy Savage out of retirement. My first WrestleMania that I saw kind of as a fan was WrestleMania 8 from the Hoosier Dome, April 92, which was amazing for me. Now, you would have been with the company for possibly 5 or 6 years at that point. What were some of the bigger or more memorable matches that you remember refereeing from when you started through to about 92?
Oh my goodness!
You must have refereed in some WrestleMania matches that kind of really stand out to you.
Yeah, I mean, my first WrestleMania IV, was interesting because that was the tournament, and I accidentally got knocked out during the Intercontinental Championship match with Brutus Beefcake and the Honky Tonk Man, and I know a lot of people thought it was Jimmy Hart hitting me in the back of the head with the megaphone that caused the damage, but that wasn't it. It was actually, I did it to myself because it's WrestleMania. So when Jimmy swung the megaphone and I felt the impact in the back of my head, I wanted it to look good. So as I face planted myself, hands, when I put them down to protect myself, my hand slipped out and my chin hit the canvas. But I guess like a boxer, best way to describe it, it hit that right spot and I just blacked out. And I remember them kind of dragging me to the back, and that's about it.
There we go. So all these years, Jimmy Hart's megaphone's been getting the credit for that.
Yeah, Jimmy made a champ, but nah, I did it to myself. Full disclosure.
There we go. So we spoke earlier about the golden era of wrestling with Hulk-a-Mania, Savage, Andre. Then you probably got to fast forward maybe another 10 years or so until you have something similar with the Attitude Era, the birth of the Mr. McMahon character, Stone Cold, The Rock, D-Generation X, and so many others. You've seen a lot of history as your time as a WWE referee. This must have been another highlight amongst many in your career. But what era and what period of time would you say was your favorite as a fan or as someone within the industry, within kind of your 22 plus years career with the WWE? What kind of era or period was your favorite and why?
As far as me being a part of it with the WWE, or pretty much, I did enjoy the Attitude Era. I think sometimes it gets romanticized a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, it was. I mean, like, what better time? You caught lightning in a bottle where you had The Rock and Stone Cold at the same time, two of the biggest stars ever, and that was amazing. But I really enjoyed the period right after that. I thought, I don't know. I thought there was the best way to describe it. I don't know if you're familiar in the UK with Saturday Night Live, the TV show that airs in the United States. Yeah. The best way I heard it described was everybody romanticizes the original Saturday Night Live cast, and when it first started, and there were some amazing sketches and some funny stuff, but a lot of it was not good. and the Attitude Era, there was a lot of good stuff, but there was a lot of other stuff that made you go, ooh, I don't know about that. So I think sometimes we think back fondly on stuff, a little too fondly, but like anything else, the wrestling industry, like every industry, evolves and changes and grows, and eventually it gets, hopefully, I'm doing the air quotes, hopefully better.
Yeah, well, I mean, speaking of the products from the current era, it could also be considered another boom time for the wrestling business, Jimmy. I mean, New Japan, they're consistently putting on fantastic wrestling, some of the best wrestling on the planet with their strong style. The WWF have probably their biggest and most talented group of wrestlers they've ever had, with Raw and SmackDown appearing to be heading into a new and more exciting direction under Bischoff and Heyman, of course. Then, of course, you've got AEW. We spoke briefly about them earlier on. They're on the scene now, already proven to be possibly the first legitimate competition for the WWE since WCW. It's certainly a great time to be a fan of wrestling, as you mentioned earlier. It's great for wrestling fans and for the industry as a whole. But what are your thoughts in a bit more detail about the current landscape, the modern day product at the moment, Jimmy, and kind of the AEW aspect in terms of being competition for the WWE, sorry, and kind of what that means for Vince McMahon and the rest of the WWE?
I think it's going to probably push the WWE to up their game, so to speak, as we like to say. But at the same time, I don't think that, and I've heard others say this too, and I agree. I don't think AEW should present themselves as direct competition to the WWE. They should present themselves as an alternative, as another choice, another voice out there for people to watch. And I know a lot of people are screaming, "Oh, they should do it on Monday nights and relive the Monday." No, I think that is a horrible decision. I think the fact that my understanding is they're going to be airing on Wednesday nights live in the United States on TNT, which I think is a perfect time for them to do it, because there's enough of a gap, especially in October when SmackDown moves to Friday nights, and you're not overwrought with like 3 hours on Monday, 2 hours on Tuesday, then you got to watch 2 hours on Wednesday, back to back to back. I think the spacing is going to help everybody out, including Raw and SmackDown, and they should just focus on doing what they do as opposed to trying to compete, if that makes sense. Just do what you do best. Their challenge is going to be, because they've already got the hardcore audience, invested. They're tuning in. They want to see that product. The challenge for them going forward is to bring in new eyes, bring in that more casual audience, which has been a challenge for even the WWE now, to bring in that casual audience. So that is going to be that is, I think, what they should focus on more than trying to compete, because as they say, in war, there's always one side that wins and one side that loses, and there's casualties. So just, in my opinion, they should just concentrate on being their own brand, concentrate on themselves, not worrying about what the other guys are doing.
Very good, very good. Changing subject slightly, Jimmy. So you worked for Vince McMahon for 22 years. What sort of kind of interaction did you have with Vince? What is he like behind the scenes? Obviously, we're familiar with the Mr. McMahon character, and we've seen snippets of Vince McMahon in certain documentaries, but we've never really got to see the true Vince McMahon. What was it like working for him for 22 years? Is he a tough boss to work for, or kind of, how would you describe him, and what sort of relationship did you have with him?
I don't know if I would use the word tough. Let me put it this way: as tough as he is, he would never put any demands upon anyone that he wouldn't demand upon himself. Let me put it this way: the guy, I don't believe he sleeps. I mean, nobody works harder than he does, and he, I guess, figures that if he doesn't sleep, or if he doesn't take a day off, neither should we. And I could see that point of view, but at the same time, it's his company, so he's going to put 100% effort into it. I never had any. I've both been, I've been on both ends of the stick with Vince, where, I've had a little bit of a talking to, and I've also been, there when he's like a pat on the back. So I think he's very fair. He's actually, believe it or not, at least in my dealings with him, open to suggestions from others. I mean, a lot of people would say, well, he's got, his own vision, which is true, and he wants to present it. But I've had plenty of times where I've like caught up to him, and I always never knew how to address him. Should I call him Mr. McMahon? Do I call him Vince? So I used to say, "Hey, boss," I'd say, "Hey, boss, do you mind if I run an idea by you or something like that?" He said, and he'd either say, "Hey, sure, what you got?" or I can't right now. Find me later, and he was always open, and he'd be honest with his, either, yeah, that's not a bad idea. Maybe we can incorporate that, or I don't know about that. That's maybe not the direction we want to go right now, but I appreciate you thinking of stuff. He was appreciative though of any input.
That's good.
And
well, we're gonna carry on.
no, and there were times, where afterwards, if we happen to be in the same area, having an adult beverage or two, where he would be just a regular guy, which was kind of cool to see. Like he'd be like, "Hey, there's the boss just letting his hair down and just enjoying the moment."
Yeah, wanting to be one of the boys.
Well, he was, but he wasn't. I guess you would consider him the boy.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a few listener questions then, Jimmy, if that's okay. So the first question from our Facebook group, Jason Hall asks, are there any wrestlers that you either enjoyed or disliked working with as a referee? So are there any wrestlers that you're in the ring with that you kind of either didn't enjoy working with for one reason or another? And if you don't want to name names, or we can skip on to the next question if you want, but how would you respond to that question?
There wasn't really anybody that I disliked working with. There were some that were a little more difficult. It's not that I disliked working with Vader, but with him, just sometimes he went into business for himself a little bit sometimes, and he keeps forgetting. Oh, sorry. Doors are slamming all over the place here.
That's all right. Carry on.
It's just that he sometimes doesn't realize his own strength. So when you got to take a bump from Vader, it's kind of like, oh man, that hurt. Hey, take it easy. I'm not McFoley.
Yeah,
you can't.
Speaking of Vader, I mean, I was a huge Vader fan growing up. Firstly, from when I first spotted him in WCW, and I really wanted Vader to have a kind of a better shake of things when he came over to the WWF in the mid-90s. Where do you stand as far as Vader going into the Hall of Fame? I mean, I personally felt that it should have happened while he was still alive. He wanted to go into the Hall of Fame while he was still alive, but that never happened, and obviously complications set in with his health. Where do you stand on somebody like Vader going into the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, it's difficult because I know someone. Not to plug him, but I know that Dave Meltzer always says that the WWE Hall of Fame is unusual in the sense that it's one man voting to see who goes in. But I definitely believe he belongs there. He's one of the best big men ever to be in the ring. So as far as does he deserve to be in there? Absolutely, 100% deserves to be in there. It's just, and I get it. I mean, every year it seems like the Hall of Fame is booked like a wrestling show. You have your opener, you have your mid card, and then you have your headliner. So it just a little more difficult when you want to induct somebody posthumously, I guess. Then you got to kind of, it's hard. But to the original question, yes, he belongs, definitely.
I agree. Another listener question from Kieran this time. We spoke earlier about you getting knocked out at WrestleMania IV, but have you ever got injured in another match and carried on working through the match, although you was injured?
Yeah. I mean, like everything from tweaking knees to rolling your ankle and thankfully not breaking it, and believe it or not, contrary to popular opinion, counting on that canvas, how many times, especially when you're doing it day in and day out, it takes a wear and tear on your shoulder. It happened quite a fingers broken, that kind of stuff. But thankfully, I got my wife to knock on wood. Knock on wood, where nothing too serious. I think the most serious thing I've ever had was a separated shoulder, just like on a heel or something like that. But other than that, I honestly have been fortunate.
Very good, very good. And this is another question from Ashley in our Facebook group. Were there any wrestlers you wanted to ref their matches in particular? So I don't know whether there were certain wrestlers that wanted referees to be in their match or be involved in the match because they knew how one another worked. Were there any kind of wrestlers that wanted you to ref their matches in particular?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's more or less, they assign referees before the show, and it doesn't happen often, but every once in a while, the talent will request a specific referee for their match. And I was fortunate enough that my biggest highlight in WrestleMania history was refereeing the main event at 24 with Edge versus The Undertaker, and that I was actually scheduled to referee a different match that night, and it was them that requested to have me referee their match for WrestleMania, and that was probably the biggest honor of my career. I mean, like, full disclosure, I'm an Undertaker guy, man. He's my guy. You know what I mean? And Edge has been a good friend for a long time. So for them to actually want me to be a part of their moment, man, it doesn't get better than that.
Pretty special. So one final listener question. Now, this is a question from Joe. Now, Joe is actually a referee on the independent scene here in the UK. And Joe wants to know, has your style of refereeing changed at all over the time that you've worked in the business due to the change of the scene of wrestling or any other outside influences such as other referees? So has your style of refereeing changed over the years?
Yeah, believe it or not, it has. I mean, like, right now, if I were to referee a match, I would consider, and I have done a few little spot for like charity shows and stuff like that, and of course, if it's a match with somebody like Swoggle, who it's going to be a complete comedy match, obviously that's going to be a different story. But if I'm going to referee a straight up wrestling match now, I would treat it more like, for me personally, kind of like how MMA referees are. Like, if you watch a Herb Dean or John McCarthy, their movements are not jumpy. They're very, they're always paying attention to the action in the ring or in the octagon or whatever, but they're focused on the talent. They keep an eye on everything that's going on. They enforce their rules the way they're supposed to, but they're not overly, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not overly sports entertainment with their mannerisms, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's more of a low key, but at the same time, don't be afraid to use facial expressions to tell your story as well when you're enforcing rules, but don't be over the top with them, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
That's how my reffing style pretty much has changed. It's gone more trying to look more shoot, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, it does. So let's have a look at some matches that's going to be taking place on tonight's Extreme Rules then, Jimmy, if that's okay. So I've got 5 matches in particular that I want to talk to you about in as much detail as we can cram into in the next 5 minutes or so. But firstly, Braun Strowman versus Bobby Lashley. Now, they had a brief encounter on Raw about 2 or 3 weeks ago where they got where they plunged through the stage, and it was all very dramatic, and they're both sent away to a local medical facility in an ambulance. But tonight's match is a last man standing match. Now, with these two brutes, these two huge, big wrestlers, very capable and very popular wrestlers, what's your thoughts on this one, and what do you think the outcome might be? Who's your pick between Braun and Bobby?
I think going into this, I think Braun needs to come out of this looking strong. I think there was an opportunity there with Braun a little while back that was missed.
Yeah.
Him being the guy and having him, defeat Bobby tonight would be a big step in getting his mojo back, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
So I expect this to be very physical. Bobby is very, I think at times underrated for his athleticism, and he's scary strong, but I don't know I don't know if his strength can compete with Braun. Braun is just a beast. But in my opinion, I think Braun needs this more than Bobby does, because Bobby, being a heel, can always rehab himself.
Yeah.
It's harder, especially for Braun. Like I said, with that missed opportunity earlier, this is the opportunity to start, not the reset button, but get him back on that right track again.
Yeah, and it sounds like Paul Heyman, who's going to be overseeing quite a lot of the aspects on Raw going forward. He's a big fan of Braun Strowman and recognises the fact that there was a lost opportunity with Braun last year or a couple of years back. So this, like you say, this could be a chance for them to reset Braun Strowman. The match that I'm looking forward to in particular, and I think a lot of more pure wrestling fans are looking forward to, is Ricochet versus AJ Styles. So they've been building this over the last couple of weeks, and AJ Styles appears to have turned heel and reforms the club with Gallows and Anderson. But this is a singles match for Ricochet's newly won United States Championship, Jimmy. I think as an athletic contest alone, this should be possibly the match of the night, or at least it should be. And I think it's a lot of people's pick to be match of the night. But what's your thoughts on this one, AJ versus Ricochet?
I agree with you. I think this has the potential to be match of the night. And I know a lot of people have referred to Ricochet as the human video game, and the guy is incredible and can do some incredible things. I like the fact that he's in the ring with AJ Styles, who I think at one time I called him the best in the world. I still think he's among the best in the world, even though he's not old, but he is aging a little bit. Let's say that. I don't want to say he's slowed down, but AJ Styles is also one of the best at telling a story in the ring. So I anticipate this one is going to be a great match from a psychology standpoint, as well as an in-ring presentation standpoint. And like I always say, you never stop learning in this industry. And I think Ricochet being in the ring with AJ Styles is going to be a huge bonus for him. I'm assuming, I could see Ricochet retaining the title. I don't want to see it taken off him so soon after winning it. But if it were on AJ Styles and he were to go forward as a heel with the club, I'm okay with that as well. But I think maybe a little too soon for Ricochet to lose the title.
Definitely. But hopefully it's the start of a longer program between the two, and hopefully more matches after tonight as well. Then you've got Kofi Kingston defending his WWE Championship against Samoa Joe. So Kofi obviously won the championship in that epic match and that epic moment at WrestleMania in April this year. Now Samoa Joe, he's had a bit of a stop-start push since he joined the main roster a couple of years ago, through one reason or another, whether it be injury but he's had a few championship opportunities which he's kind of not taken advantage of. This seems to be a bit of a reset for Samoa Joe. He's kind of back in the championship picture, for want of a better phrase, with Kofi. Kofi has proved to be a very, very capable champion, and Samoa Joe is one of the best heels in the business. What's your thoughts on this one? Do you think Kofi's going to retain, or do you think Samoa Joe is just going to be too much for Kofi tonight?
I think tonight is not going to be the right time for Samoa Joe. Although, like you said, Samoa Joe is one of the best heels in the business, and what I like about Samoa Joe is the believability. I mean, when you see him, when he speaks, his mannerisms, everything about him screams, this guy's legit. And you got to be aware of him. You know what I mean? So I like the fact with Samoa Joe, he's not trying to be that cool heel that doesn't get a heel reaction. You know what I mean? And I think that's a little bit. I don't want to say it's a lost art. That's the wrong term again. I think it's. Oh man, I wish more guys would try to be heels and not try to look for acceptance. And Joe's a perfect example of that. But what I like about this matchup is the conflicting styles. I mean, like, I like to see more aggression come out in Kofi in this one, show a little more fight, as opposed to the high flying stuff. But at the same time, you're going to see some of that as well. As much as I'd like to see Samoa Joe as WWE champ, I think that would be so cool. Because only because I like Joe as a heel, and I love his work. I love his work. So again, with Kofi, you've got something with Kofi right now. keep rolling and let it roll. I think maybe to October when they go to Fox. And I know Paul Heyman says Brock is going to be the mission, but I could see them waiting until October, that first SmackDown on Fox, and Brock shows up and just wham.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be an epic first show on Fox. It really would. But I agree with you completely. I think that Kofi is retaining tonight because I think there's still a lot more mileage in Kofi as the champion. There's a lot more stories to be told. There could be a follow-up match between Joe and Kofi maybe at SummerSlam. But yeah, I think that keep the belt on Kofi. And I think that ultimately it's going to lead to him being confronted by Lesnar somewhere down the line. And so, yeah, that's an interesting one. So the next match is the Undertaker and Roman Reigns versus Shane McMahon and Drew McIntyre. So I'm quite intrigued by this match because you don't often see much from the Undertaker nowadays. You said earlier that you're definitely an Undertaker guy, teaming up with Roman Reigns, who defeated him a few WrestleManias ago. This is, a fantastic opportunity for Drew McIntyre as well, because he's been one of those wrestlers that's been getting a bit more of a push recently. It's seen as a bit more of the future of the business, quite possibly. But kind of this is a no-holds-barred tag match, so there's going to be a lot of outside action by the sounds of it, possibly some weapons getting involved, some chairs. What's your thoughts on this one, and where's your excitement level, especially with it including The Undertaker?
That's my curiosity level is peaked in this one because, again, exactly like you said, this is an opportunity for Drew McIntyre to break out because whatever it was, a decade or so ago, he was labeled as the next one, the chosen one.
Yeah.
But Vince saw something in this kid, and it took him a little while to find that, to go away and work elsewhere and find himself. And now he's back, and you're right. I think this guy definitely can be the future of this company. At least one of the pieces of the puzzle for the future of this company. Drew is awesome. And that's where I think this is going. I think this is going to be a bit of a showcase for Drew and maybe a breakout period for him. Maybe it leads to a singles match with him and Undertaker at SummerSlam.
That would be awesome. Yeah, that would be awesome.
You talk about getting the rub. That would be the ultimate rub. So I don't know if that team wins. Maybe Shane is the one who eats the pin in this one, but at the same time, maybe this is something that furthers Undertaker and Drew McIntyre.
That would be good to see. That would be good to see. The final match I want to talk about, Jimmy, is Seth Rollins and Becky Lynch versus Baron Corbin and Lacey Evans. So not many people are excited about this match, but you have to consider the fact that both the Universal Championship and Becky's Raw Women's Championship are on the line here. Winner takes all in this mixed match challenge. A lot of people have got a bit of a downer at the moment on Baron and Lacey. Not very popular amongst more pure wrestling fans, but I think they make fantastic heels, and I think that they've really done their best with this storyline and with this angle, and I think it should be an interesting match tonight. I wouldn't be surprised to see the titles change hands, really just to get a bit more heat on Baron and Lacey, and we know how the WWE like to swerve their audience and make them want to tune in on Monday because of sometimes a popular or maybe an unpopular decision. But where's your thoughts on this one?
It's interesting. I think this stipulation had been done once before, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong. I agree with you. I think that Baron Corbin is a very good heel. His in-ring work is underappreciated, I think, by some. I think he's a lot better than people give him credit for. I'm not thrilled with the current presentation, for lack of a better term, of Seth with Becky, because it seems like he's the how do I say it without,
the B word.
Like in the back, what she said, okay, like that kind of. I'm not a big fan of that. I think they could be presented better as a couple on television, but that's just me. The other thing I don't like about having these intergender tag matches in WWE is because, as we've seen in the past, the females can perform offensive maneuvers on the men, but it can't go, because of their edict. it can't go the other way. Like the men can't. You can't choke slam a woman or something like that. You know what I mean? You can't. You can't perform
totally,
any op. So I think that hurts in this case, but I'm interested, but I wish there was a different way to go about it as opposed to having this match. That's all. And I could see Baron Corbin somehow them winning the title in some form or fashion. Maybe Brock causes a distraction of some sort. Or I actually heard this the other day and thought, I don't know if this would work, but because Paul Heyman said that Brock is going to cash into, what if he were to cash in on Seth tonight and take the title? Does that mean because Seth lost his title that Lacey automatically becomes the women's champ? So I've heard that. Yeah. I think it was Bully Ray who said that.
I heard that in the same interview. Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, would it work that way? And even if it didn't, at least it's a different outcome. I don't know. I wish I was. I hate to say it. I wish I was more interested in this match, but I am, but not to the level I think I should be.
So, what's your feelings on like pure intergender matches? Because only last weekend we saw a fantastic main event match at Slammiversary, Impact Tessa Blanchard versus Sami Callihan. Now that was the match of the night in many people's opinion, and Sami Callihan obviously got a lot of offense in, won the match, but it was a straight up match between these two. Tessa Blanchard is obviously one of the best, not just women wrestlers in the world, but one of the best wrestlers full stop in the world. But I don't know if you got a chance to see that match or what your thoughts are in general. I mean, I get the idea that you'd prefer to have proper intergender matches as opposed to kind of this rather fluffy mixed match kind of challenge type of match that the WWE present to us. So what's your kind of thoughts on intergender matches in general?
To be perfectly honest, going into last week's match with Tessa and Sami, I thought, I was never really, I was of the mindset, I wasn't a huge fan of the intergender matches because, for personal reasons, I didn't like it. I watched that match going into it with an open mind, and they told a hell of a story. It was very entertaining. I believe Tessa Blanchard is a special athlete, special talent, and she made it work. She absolutely, and of course, Sami, of course, is a little bit out there, but he also made it work, and it can happen. I just don't want to see it happen a lot. It should be made to feel special. It should be infrequent, if that makes sense. Gotcha. And when it does happen, it should be for a good reason, as opposed to, hey, let's just have an intergender match. Does that make sense?
Definitely. So, final question on Extreme Rules, and there's obviously it's a stacked card. There's lots of matches that I haven't touched on. I'm looking forward to the whole event. To be honest with you, it looks like they've put together a very, very good show. But what match do you think? Firstly, what match are you looking forward to the most, Jimmy? And which match do you think will go on last? Because there's a few matches that could potentially deserve the billing of main event. But what do you think would go on last? The mixed match challenge, or the match pitting the Undertaker versus Shane and Drew? What match are you looking forward to, and which one will go on last in your opinion?
I think the last match will be the intergender tag match. It should be, because the main title is on that match. All due respect to Kofi, so that one should be last. Again, it all depends on which story is going to take precedence tonight, and it's hard to judge sometimes. Like, obviously the opening match has to be something that's going to grab everybody's attention, but at the same time, I could very well see the opening match being Braun and Bobby, just because it's going to be action packed and get people invested. So with that being said, I think for all intents and purposes, the intergender match should be the last match, should be the main event, because unless there's a story that supersedes it, the title should be on last. The main title.
Okie dokie. So Extreme Rules is the final pay-per-view before we head into SummerSlam. Now that's going to be taking place in Toronto, of course, Jimmy. Which is in your hometown. I'm guessing you'll be attending all the festivities around SummerSlam only next month. You looking forward to SummerSlam?
Absolutely. I mean, it's going to be a busy week. I don't know exactly where I'm going to be and what I'm going to be doing. I'll be around. I'll be visiting some old friends and getting reacquainted with people and just catching up and stuff like that. But it's going to be fun. It's going to be very interesting. And I know there's a lot of other wrestling coming to town. I know that the Progress guys are coming here. Yeah. It's pretty much, SummerSlam is almost turning into like a WrestleMania week where everybody starts to gather in the town that it's taking place in and have their own events, which is great because, again, like I said, it's a perfect time to be a wrestling fan because there's so much out there.
Good for the business, definitely good for the business. So, Jimmy, that's pretty much the end of the podcast. I want to thank you for coming on today and answering all of my questions and my listener questions. Now you're obviously a regular host on Sportsnet. You've got your Sportsnet mug there with you and a daily presence on social media. But where can my listeners of the Wrestling with Johners podcast find you on social media? What's your kind of Facebook handle, Twitter, Instagram? Where can my listeners find you on social media or get in touch with you to say hi?
Yeah, well, I'm active on Twitter at Jimmy Korderas and Instagram, where I post some old school pictures and stuff like that, which is at real Jimmy Korderas, because somebody else took Jimmy Korderas. I don't know who. And on Facebook, it's I have a fan page there, former WWE referee Jimmy Korderas, and I'm pretty active on there usually. I can be snarky sometimes, but that's just me having fun. Now on weekdays I throw a little 1-minute video out there called my Reffin' Rant, which I just pick a topic and decide to give a minute insight into it or my thoughts on some topic. And usually in my little 1 minute I have a mug of some kind and an old school T-shirt. I go through my my archive of T-shirts and I'll throw something random on just for the heck of it.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, Jimmy, I just want to thank you so much for coming on board today. I really appreciate it. Thank you for giving us some insight into your 30+ year career and 22 years with the WWE and how it all started, and your thoughts on tonight's pay-per-view as well. So thank you very much for coming on board today, Jimmy.
No, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's fun.
Thank you. So that's it. That's another episode of the Wrestling with Johners podcast. Please don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share and shout about this podcast. Tell your friends and tell your family. And please keep listening to the Wrestling with Johners podcast for all of your NXT UK, NXT, WWE, and all-round wrestling goodness on a weekly basis. Without you sharing, subscribing to this podcast, we can't continue to grow and improve. So hit like, share, and subscribe now. Of course, you can follow us once again on Twitter at @withjohners_pod, on Instagram at Wrestling with Johners, and you can search Wrestling with Johners on Facebook and find our interactive community page there. We'll be back again on Tuesday, where we'll have our Extreme Rules review featuring all of the matches that we previewed just a moment ago with Jimmy. And the card looks very stacked, and it's going to be a tremendous show, so don't forget to catch that tonight on the WWE Network. After that, we'll be back again on Friday with our weekly recap show of NXT and NXT UK. As always, we'll be covering all of the major stories from around the wrestling world, and especially any of the fallout from the Extreme Rules pay-per-view that's on Friday's show. But in the meantime, I want to thank you all for listening and watching, and take care, have yourself a good weekend, and speak to you all soon.